about 4,500 crore rupees a month for the 10 lakh jobs it has promised in mission mode over the next 18 months. Annually, it will cost the exchequer about 54,000 crore rupees. Almost entirely, these are existing vacancies or posts remaining unfulfilled or unfilled over the past few years due to a generally slow and complex recruitment process, court interventions, and more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze this particular announcement closely and try and figure out how it is going to impact the economy, the job market, and what kind of a cascading effect it might possibly have. And to do that, I have with me on the program today Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard, and Mr. Ajay Shankar, former Secretary, Government of India. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Mr. Shankar, I'd like to start the program with you first. What do you make of this announcement of 10 lakh jobs in 18 months?
I see this as a very welcome political decision because the unrest amongst the youth regarding jobs is rising. And for the 10 lakh jobs, there would be millions of, at least a million plus people or more who have been preparing and hoping to try and get a government job. So there is this, sense of heightened expectations that has been building up. And therefore, this is a welcome political decision because it is very difficult to say that I have a vacancy in government and I won't fill it up. Absolutely. And the fact that these vacancies exist is public knowledge because we live in a more open, transparent society. So this has been public knowledge, and there is no good reason why, if there is a vacant government job, so obviously you need the person, you need it to be able to do your work, and you're not being able to fill it up. So I think it's a very good decision, a timely decision. And it also is a reflection of a reality which you hinted at, that the recruitment process has not been efficient enough. And therefore, these vacancies have built up. Now, without going into why they built up or what could have been done, should have not been done, it's good that in a mission mode, these vacancies will now be filled up. On the other aspects and issues, as we go along, we'll come back.
Absolutely. Mr. Bhattacharya, coming back to you now, Mr. Shankar very clearly mentioned that this is a very good political decision that has been taken. Is that what it is, with the 2024 elections in mind? And let's not also forget that this decision comes at round about a time when the Agnipath scheme was also announced. There is a lot of protests as far as the youth are concerned with regards to the scheme too. And there is a sense of disgruntlement amongst the youth because they are getting angsty that jobs are not being filled up and they have nothing to do. So is this what it is? Nothing but a political move?
Well, there's political signaling there. Remember that Mr. Modi's government, when it came to power for the first time in 2014, it did talk about creating more jobs. It did not specify jobs in which sector, whether the government sector or in the economy as such. Now, what we are seeing now, if you look at the government's size, the manpower size as such, in the last 6 to 7 years, they have seen a gradual erosion in the government's staff strength, particularly in the central government. If you look at the latest actual figure for March 2020, the figures are something around 3.1 million jobs. And a year earlier, they were 3.8 or something like that. A year before that were more. So what we have seen is the gradual reduction in the actual staff strength of the central government. And as Mr. Shankar was pointing out, the number of vacancies have also been rising. So as on March 2020, a similar figure is the number of vacancies in the central government is as large as 8.6 or 8.7 lakh vacancies. So what in actual terms the government is trying to do is to fill those vacancies which have been created over a period of time in the next 10, 18 months and add another 1.6 lakh jobs into it, which means create additional vacancies to be created. So filling up 8.7 lakh jobs should not be a problem because the vacancies already exist. But creating jobs for 1.6 lakh more, would be an issue. Now, that is one kind of administrative challenge because the government's capacity to fill these vacancies has not been very good, as I am telling you that the government's staff strength has been coming down. Now, at a macroeconomic point of view, I have a serious problem with this approach where the government is probably going back in time and seeing itself as a major source of job creator instead of creating conditions in which jobs are generated. So therefore, it is clearly a political move. It is an ambitious task. It is going to be very, very difficult to meet these targets unless it is really in mission mode. So you have the assembly elections coming up in the next few months. We have a 2024 election. So I don't see this anything apart from a political move. And economically, I don't think what the government is doing is barking up the wrong tree as far as job creation is concerned. Instead, it should focus on other issues if we want to create more jobs in the economy, which is the promise with which the government came to power in 2014.
Absolutely. We'll build on the points that you just made, and I'll take them forward with Mr. Shankar. But I'll come back to you, Mr. Bhattacharya, about the issue of unemployment and what it is and where it stands, and how do we get that particular aspect, addressed. But Mr. Shankar, clearly, why now has been answered by both of you. It's a political move, keeping in mind the assembly elections that are coming up, crucial states in the near future, as well as the big one in 2024. But let's talk about messaging, because this particular government has been talking about privatization, private jobs, giving the private sector a fillip and so on and so forth. But now you come up with a mega announcement like this of 10 lakh jobs, most of which will be taken up in the government sector, about 90%. So what about the messaging in this? What happens to the privatization push? What happens to being, a lean or minimum governance and all those aspects?
As I had said earlier, these are vacancies that are going to be filled up. So either these posts were not needed in government, in which case the vacancies shouldn't have been there. And if they are needed, then the presumption is that they are needed because if the posts are filled up, the government will do a better job and serve the people of India better. And therefore, the economic and social benefits will far outweigh the costs. And that's the underlying premise behind the creation of every government job. That in terms of public welfare, social gain, economic gain, the cost of employing somebody is less than the public benefit. So on that, I'm very clear, and this has nothing to do with the other program of the government or intention of privatizing or increasing the role of the private sector. But what we are facing in India is a very serious structural problem, a structural problem which this government has inherited and so far has not been able to make a serious dent on, and which is to get India to take the full advantage of its young people wanting to work, wanting to do productive work and get jobs, and they want to work at wages which are far lower than that of competitive economies. So India has been singularly unsuccessful in taking advantage of its low-wage young manpower at the lower end of the spectrum. And our development is sui generis because every other industrializing country has first taken advantage of its young people and low wages to succeed in labor-intensive manufacturing. This we have yet to achieve. So where we should have succeeded in creating lots of jobs in labor-intensive manufacturing, we are still to succeed. And that great demographic dividend, which has been around now for over 10 years, is becoming a demographic curse because we are nowhere near creating all the jobs that we need to create to these young people who have energy, who have ambition, who are willing to work hard. So the creation of government jobs is a fallback position for the lack of success on the larger front. I mean, just to give you a personal example, and it's material for today's discussion, when I joined the IAS, I don't know, about 45, 40 years back, or almost 50 years back, there was no IAS officer from Gujarat in my cadre because the Gujarat economy had already become dynamic enough. There were enough good jobs in the private sector for any smart young Gujarati boy or girl wanting to join the IAS. But we are nowhere that in these huge states of UP, Bihar, etc. And even in the other states where we have been doing well economically, job creation has not kept pace with the growing expectations of the people. So we have a structural problem, we have a serious crisis. We need to confront it head on and see what we can do as soon as possible to create labor-intensive manufacturing and jobs in India. Even today, these jobs are moving from China to Vietnam and not to India at the level that we need.
Absolutely.
Bangladesh has succeeded. Their per capita income is overtaking ours this year. Their export growths are at over 20% per annum. So we need to do serious soul searching to get our act together to create jobs. This will only buy us temporary peace.
Absolutely, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, Mr. Shankar. Let's continue on this line and build on the points that you just made, Mr. Bhattacharya. This is just going to be a temporary fix. So, what is the long-term fix? How do we ensure that these unemployed youth actually get into the job market, get jobs, and start making a contribution towards nation building and towards economic development as a whole?
What we are seeing right now, I will first place the numbers in there so that we get an overall perspective. India right now has, the predominantly it's an agricultural workforce. And within that overall workforce of around 470 million or 480 million people, what we are adding on an average every year is around 4.5 million of additional people who are getting jobs. Now, in the government sector, the central government sector particularly, that number is a minuscule number. Now, it's around, as I told you, it is actually coming down year after year. And if you take out the Indian Railways, which has begun recruiting only in the last couple of years, the numbers were actually coming down. And so the latest number, as I said, was only 3.1 million in the central government, which include around 1.2 million of the railways. Now, so if you want to create these 1 million jobs in the next 18 months, you have to create almost 15% of the annual intake of extra jobs that you create in the normal course. Now, to believe that 15% of the jobs that you create in a year, you will like to fill that vacancy and you will complete the recruitment process and everything, and that too in the government system, is something that's a gigantic task. It only requires humongous effort. Now, having said that, why is it that the government is using this fallback option, which is because we have not undertaken the basic, what I call the factor market reforms. At one level, we have not properly addressed the question of enhancing the vocational skills and vocational training of the Indian youth. At another level, we have not addressed the factor market reform, the rigidities, particularly in the labor field. And of course, land was tried but was failed. And now when agriculture was sought to be liberalized, there was this agitation which came in the way. Now, if you see that on factor market reforms, whether it is agricultural reforms or whether it is the labor reforms or whether it is the land reforms, you are stuck in the old framework. Now, how can you create more jobs when your entrepreneurs, a government entrepreneur will tell you that he will not have one unit which has got more than 2,000 people working there, because if he does that, then he is in trouble. So, and you will not enjoy the economies of scale. So you are not actually encouraging the Indian entrepreneurs to set up factories of scale which can take advantage of those scale and therefore hire more people. So that is not happening. Number two, you also have the recent instances of how some of the big investors who had come in but met with some regulatory hurdles which were fairly controversial. I'm talking about whether it is till recently the famous cases there of Amazon. Now there are issues and there are regulatory issues there. So you are not been able to create a dynamic industrial economy which will create jobs. And since you are not creating those jobs, the government is taking this position that let me try and create these jobs, which is actually will not going to solve the larger problems of the economy unless you speed up those factor market reforms, unless you create greater avenues for vocational skills and vocational education for the Indian youth. So we will be forced to get into a scenario in which the Indian youth will like to work for the government, where you get the benefits of being in the government, so the pension, this and that, and you are not really being able to encourage. Even in the labor code on which was supposed to cover the gig economy is not yet in place.
Right.
The labor code has been passed by Parliament, but it is yet to be notified. So there was some hope that the gig economy will really get encouraged by the new labor code, but it seems that new labor code is in limbo. So there is a policy failure, which I feel is also contributing to our inability to create adequate number of jobs in the private sector, which is why the government has to come in and make this feeble attempt at creating 15% of the jobs that would otherwise have been created in the economy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhattacharya, for putting that so beautifully in perspective for us as to why we are not able to create the kind of jobs we need to create. Time to get quick closing comments now from both my panelists with the best way forward and what next. Starting first with you, Mr. Shankar.
The first requirement is to accept that there is a serious problem. The next is to have a decent amount of discussion on what are the factors and what can be done in a year or two to create the environment that we start getting the jobs that are moving out of China into India and not only to Vietnam. And then create a consensus in the entire political class, in the the leaders of the young, the leaders of our intelligentsia, as well as unions, that India needs to go in this direction if we are not to have a serious crisis on our hands and unrest on the streets. And I do believe that a consensus is possible. I also believe it can be implemented and there will be political gains rather than losses in doing what needs to be done. Because Bangladesh is a good example. It was a basket case and now its per capita income will overtake us, and on human development indicators they are ahead. I will suggest just 2 points for consideration. One is we implement the labor code that is passed in Parliament, but in parallel, implement a social welfare state or social safety net for all workers, 90% of whom are in the unorganized sector, through the public exchequer and through taxpayers' money. Once we do that, we create the condition where labor-intensive manufacturing can be done and scaled up without the entrepreneur fearing the cost of employing lots of workers. Then we need to create a consensus at local levels that we must not have unrest in our factories. The government, management, and workers must work out some mechanisms of being able to handle issues as they arise promptly and peacefully, and not have an explosive incident which happens once in a while everywhere in India. Because we have to give the Indian entrepreneur confidence to employ people in thousands in factories, and only when he has confidence will a foreign investor have that confidence. And again, to give you an idea of scale, Apple got all its work done for the iPhone and the iPads through Foxconn of Taiwan in a factory in Shanghai where they built dormitory accommodation for 100,000 people along with the factory. This is what we had in our textile mills, which were globally competitive 100 years back. But today we are nowhere near that. Nobody has confidence to employ 30, 40,000 workers in a factory. We are not creating accommodation for them. We are not skilling them to make them productive enough. So we have to do all this on a war footing, and we can do it. The young Indian is very good. I mean, we just go back to World War II. 1 million soldiers were recruited in 42. In 43, they were defeating the Japanese, and the Germans were fighting as well as them. So our workers can do wonders, but we have to create jobs for them and work hard to create an environment that private investment comes in and creates jobs.
Absolutely. And Ms. Bhattacharya, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I will just say that I will make only one point that, we should not go back in time as far as economic policies are concerned. We should not go back in time in terms of the kind of trade policies that we are formulating. We should not go back in time the kind of industrial policies that we are formulating, which is actually increasingly becoming very, very selective, discretionary, and picking and choosing and creating greater hurdles and greater protection and barriers to releasing the animal spirit of the Indian entrepreneurs and the young Indians. So I think if we can bring back the flavor of those reforms of the 1990s, which was essentially moving more towards transparent, tariff-based controls instead of discretionary and physical controls, I think we would have helped create a better export market, a more sustainable export market, not just riding on commodity inflation, but also riding on volume exports rise. And that will create a strong base for creation or creating more jobs in the economy, and that will also help the government not take up such, I would say, a very nervous response of announcing 1 million jobs to be created in 1.5 years.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen. We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Real pleasure having you on the program to discuss such an important issue. Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya and Mr. Shankar as well. All right, then what's coming out of this discussion is that it's an attempt by the government to try and address a challenge that it has been facing for some time now. There have been several vacancies, lakhs of them in the government, both central and at the state level, and the government has decided to make this announcement of 10 lakh jobs in 18 months or take it up on a mission mode or war footing. And this is clearly a political move, keeping in mind the crucial state elections or assembly elections that are around the corner, as well as leading up to the parliamentary election in 2024. The youth are unemployed. The unemployment rate is at an all-time high, and there is a clear sense of disgruntlement as far as the youth is concerned, because jobs are few to come by. And this is being addressed by the government. Let's not forget, of this 10 lakhs, 90% of the jobs are going to be vacancies that are already there that will be filled up. Why haven't they been filled up? Do we have the capacity to fill them up in a span of 18 months remains to be seen. If they have been left vacant for so many years, do they need to be filled up is another question that comes to mind. But something has to be done, because unemployment is a problem, and this demographic dividend that we are talking about and that we have been talking about for the last decade or so is soon turning into be a real nightmare. because we are not creating the kind of jobs that we need to create. As far as messaging is concerned, we need to continue to build an environment, have the right kind of policies to create jobs, to create an atmosphere in which people would want to come to India to find or to give out those jobs as well. China is facing the brunt and has been doing so over the last few years. Many jobs are moving out of China, but they are not really coming to India. They are going to places like Vietnam and Bangladesh. Why? Is something that we need to introspect and get that in order. With that, it's a wrap. But before I go, let me remind you to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well, and share the content so that more people get to know about Bharata first. And before I go, I'll give you a message as well with regards to where we stand with the Knowledge Center and what you need to do to enroll and what you will get if you enroll as well, because we have massive discounts going on at the Knowledge Center. Here's a message.
Cracking UPSC CSC is like running a marathon. To get across the line, you need the right guide and training partner. Look no further than Bharata First Knowledge Center, your one-stop destination for all your competitive exams needs. Classes by the best names and subject matter experts in the field. Courses designed to address all aspects of the challenges at hand. Highly affordable courses priced at less than 150 rupees. Register now at kc.bharatafirst.com or download the Bharata First app now. Avail discounts of over 90%. Happy learning.
So that is all the details that you need to have as far as the Knowledge Center is concerned. You can log in to kc.bharatafirst.com or download the Bharata First app and register now. That's it from me. See you again next time.